Welcome to the next episode of the Dark Web Deacon. So let's check our secure connections, adjust our hoodies, and as always, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. As we close out 2022 and almost 3 years of me running this channel, I wanted to do a refresher on what is the Dark Web for 2022. And so for today's episode, what you're going to get is information on Dark Web 101. If you are new to the Dark Web, we'll do a refresher. Why can't the Dark Web be shut down? Current trends of the Dark Web in 2022. The future of the Dark Web as I see it. And if you stick around to the very end, there's also an ID protection checklist. I'm going to give you 10 tips that are all completely free on how you can protect your identity from cyber criminals. So let's get into it. Okay, Dark Web 101. Well, if there's 3 things I hope you take from this video, it's these 3 facts. One is that the Dark Web contains billions of stolen customer records. This can be anything from credit card information to emails and passwords, passports, you name it. So in terms of the risk to your identity, there's a massive treasure trove of data that's completely available on the Dark Web. 2, the Dark Web cannot be shut down, and we will have a section on this, and I'll explain why it can't be shut down. Number 3, the Dark Web at the end of the day is a means to securely and anonymously transfer information. So those are the 3 most important things I want you to take away from this video. So maybe before we want to start getting into some of the more heavier material, just a kind of a quick question. Which password is more secure? Password 1, Q24 SDP, capital Q #, or I too saw a red bear? And I'm going to have the answer later on in the video, but just something to think about. Some of your perceptions on how to protect your identity, what does it mean to actually be secure, are often construed by, tropes from the media or politicians or even other technologists who don't completely understand the underlying technology. So just think about that question. Now, going to the Dark Web. Well, sort of. For those who are brave enough and daring enough, you can scan this QR code. I promise there's no viruses on this site. I pre-checked it beforehand. But if you scan this QR code, you're going to be able to go to a site that contains personal information. So give you a few seconds. Great. Well, if you scan the site, you would have gone to a site called paste2.org. Now, you say, wait a minute. Is that the Dark Web? I didn't need any special software or any special browsers or any credentials. Well, it's not the Dark Web in the traditional sense, but I wanted to show how easy it is to access personal information and why data breaches and ransomware have exploded over the last few years just because the amount of information and credentials that are out there to attack individuals and systems is massive. And that's how easy it is. This particular site, people do post random information. So what is the Dark Web? Well, there's a particular analogy of considering when you think about the internet, think of it as an iceberg. And you have kind of the public web or the surface web, which is on top, which makes up about 4 to 5%, sometimes 8%, depending on who you're talking to. And that surface web is all the websites you use every day. So it's, the news sites, the sports sites, your search engines, that's all on the surface web. The next part is the deep web, and that makes up the vast majority of the internet, probably easily 80%. People often construe deep web with the dark web. The deep web is not the dark web. The deep web is basically all the different sites and content and pages that are not indexed by a link crawling search engine, so you can't get to it. So Google and Yahoo and Bing, you can't get to those sites, or they don't show up in a search, and they do require some type of authentication. So what do I mean by this? Think of it like maybe your Gmail account. You log into your Gmail and all those web pages that are within your Gmail account or Google account, or maybe you log into your doctor's portal to check on your medical information. All those web pages after you log in, that's all content. That's all in theory connected to the internet, obviously, because you're on your mobile device, you're on your computer, you're accessing it. But it's not something that search engine will index and will never pop up in a search. And then finally, there's the dark web, which makes up a very small chunk of the overall internet. And this is the part of the internet, if we look at one interpretation of it, this does require some type of special software to access, and often special credentials and personas, and basically a lot of these sites, you do have to kind of build up a little bit of a reputation, depending on the information you post and how you interact with the other forums and other posters, and you can get access to deeper and potentially deeper links. Or in some cases, you have to pay to get access to some of these deeper links with either Bitcoin or Monero cryptocurrency payments. So, who created the dark web? Well, at least the Tor piece. Often when people think about the dark web and special software, they think about downloading the Tor browser, which is freely available from the Tor project. The reality is the United States Navy and MIT created the Tor network. And so kind of when people think of the dark web, that is what they think of. And those two things were created in order to create a secure network to transfer information between different government agencies and military agencies, and to allow for secure communications when people were out in the field and maybe didn't have access to special types of government or military equipment. So this provided an ease of access to transfer information anywhere in the world, secretly and securely. So when I talk about Tor, we're going to focus a little bit about Tor. As I said, it's often what people think of when it comes to downloading special software to access the dark web. Basically, the Tor browser, there's actually a few pieces of Tor, the different products, but the Tor browser specifically is what I'm talking about here. Basically, it allows users to securely and anonymously transfer data. And how it does that is the user will download the Tor browser, and you'll go through 3 hops. You'll go through an entry node hop, and all these connections are secure. So you'll go through an entry node hop, and let's say you're in New York City, and you download Tor browser, you enter a specific node somewhere on the East Coast. So let's just say you just enter through New York. So you enter through New York, that all of a sudden will relay to, let's say, a server that's on the Tor browser in Texas, and that would potentially maybe relay to one more final hop, an exit node in Paris, France. And at that point, you are on the Tor network, but first, all of your communication is secure. But number 2, it appears as if you are a user on the Tor network who lives in Paris, right? So this is how it obfuscates your identity and protects your privacy. So as I've alluded to, you can think of the dark web in terms of a strict and a liberal interpretation. The strict interpretation of the dark web is where you do need special software, and you often do need special personas in order to get access to it. And people think of it in terms of the Tor network or the I2P browser, or special forums that often people get on and access through these various onion sites. But there is a more liberal view of the dark web, and often that's how I view it, especially when it comes to identity protection for businesses and consumers. And the liberal view is, well, the dark web is really anywhere where potentially someone's information is being sold in an exchange or independently through some of these smaller vendors. And so in terms of where your information is being potentially sold and your identity is potentially being stolen, this can be on Messenger server, Discord, Telegram, Facebook Messenger, YouTube has actually tons of information about how to hack other individuals. There's videos on there that are easily available. So in terms of the content of how to hack, how to access sites, different tools to use, and then the actual data itself that's being sold, a lot of that has moved off of traditional dark web and onion services on the Tor network, and it's available through secure messaging services like Discord and Telegram. So the quote-unquote dark web isn't necessarily, in my view, just the Tor browser. So how does information get onto the dark web? Well, you can generally think of 5 specific groups that help to exfiltrate data and get it onto the dark web, or involved in some type of cybercrime or hacking activity. One is script kiddies. And the script kiddie is kind of the traditional Hollywood hacker trope. It's an individual, maybe it's a younger kid, maybe it's someone who's in their teens, their 20s. They're not necessarily an expert at programming, but they know enough. And they're not really, their motives aren't necessarily nefarious. Sometimes they're just trying to play around. Sometimes they're trying to press systems. Sometimes they're just trying to be disruptive. Number 2 is nation states. So these are highly educated, very well-funded countries that have a very large cybersecurity budget. So when you think about that, the United States, you can think about North Korea, you can think about China, you can think about Russia. Brazil has an up-and-coming military aspect of some of their cyber units. And so these are very well funded, like I said, very well educated individuals working specifically for the government or proxies of the government. Sometimes they're not official government institutions or organizations, but there's often some funding involved underneath. And obviously North Korea and China have had, and Russia have had some significant attacks on the West, whether it be the meatpacking plant or the Colonial Pipeline attack, the attack on Sony. These were all what are believed to be probably nation-state actors in the space. Number 3 is organized crime. And so I think organized crime probably has had the biggest impact to the dark web in terms of operationalizing the dark web. When you look back about 10 years, there was a fair amount of data there. There was some basic tools, but usually you had to be fairly sophisticated, some type of technical background if you wanted to execute a particular attack, piece of malware, a virus on an individual or an organization. Organized crime really has made large investments in this space in terms of operationalizing it. And what I mean by that in terms of tools, techniques, training. And so because of that, it has become much easier to execute an attack with really not a lot of technical background, and also the ability to outsource and hire services, whether it be a service to do a denial of service attack or a service to create a piece of malware for yourself. Those kind of outsourced contract services are available, and a lot of that is due to organized crime, figuring it's a lot easier to kind of do a quote-unquote digital mugging than it is to try to maybe try to do something in quote unquote the meat world, the meat space, which is the real world. Then there's anarchists. So anarchists, I mean, obviously you can think of someone like Anonymous as being probably the most famous of the anarchy kind of cyber groups. And their motivations vary in different ways. In terms of, some of it is over politics, some of it's over specific regional grievances. So their motivations vary. And someone like Anonymous is a very loosely organized group. It's not essentially organized. And their motivations, again, often media will portray them as kind of the bad guys. I don't agree with that. I think there's maybe things that they have done that we can disagree with. We can have intellectual discussions on, but there's also a lot of good things they've done. They've done a lot in terms of trying to fight people who target kids on the internet, try to make victims of kids, whether it be through various pornography or other types of instances. So things are gray when it comes to not only just the digital world, but the dark web specifically. Sometimes it's not easy to draw black and white lines, and I think the anarchist part is definitely one of them. And then finally, I think one often people miss is disgruntled employees. So employees, whether it be in the IT department, in human resources, in legal, those who have access to very rich company information. Think about employee records that have social security numbers and employment numbers and you name it, name and address, next of kin, all that kind of stuff. They're really rich data sets, and there are actual sites on the dark web that if you have that data available, you could potentially resell it. So what is your kind of identity worth on the dark web? There's been some studies done over the years, and if you look at kind of all the general PII data you have, the average kind of cost, if you were to take everyone's PII, so like one individual's, all their PII, their social security, their credit, their debit, let's just say they have, average balances on all their subscription services, passports, think about anything that could potentially be resold. It's about $1,200 for the average person in terms of kind of what your full, complete identity is worth. Things like SSNs can go for $1. Credit and debit cards can go from $5 to $30, depending on if it's just a credit card number or it has everything from credit card to security code to your zip code and all that. Subscription services, shockingly, things like HBO Go, Netflix, Hulu, can go from $1 to $10. And often the reason for this, what people often forget is people reuse passwords. So it's not just about necessarily the subscription to HBO Go, which is obviously factors into the price, but also chances are the email password that was used to access HBO Go could probably access that person's bank account or credit card account or something like that, because people love to reuse passwords. So what drives dark web prices? Well, there's 4 factors: supply, demand, value, and reuse. So supply and demand is economics 101. When there's a large supply of data, that drives down price. So you can think of things like emails and passwords. Emails specifically, there's a ton of emails, billions and tens of billions of records on the dark web. And so that drives down, the price of an email. There's demand. Obviously, there's a high demand for something like a debit card that has a high balance. And so if someone has the credentials for that, there's a high demand for that. It's quick, it's easy money. The other thing is value. So it's kind of what I alluded to earlier. The value is, okay, well, is it a debit card with $5? Is it a debit card with $1,000? Is it travel points, airline miles? Maybe someone has 10,000 miles or 1 million airline miles. Like that has value, right? Because that equals hard cash that can be used pretty quickly, and it's hard to trace. And then finally, reuse. So kind of back to the debit card example, let's say it's a debit or a gift card that has, $300. Once that debit card is used, that's it. The transaction's done. Now, something like a driver's license or a passport, that can constantly be reused and resold. So the reuse is there since it's not a one-time transaction. So that obviously inflates the price. So in terms of, we talked a little bit about the dark web. Kind of the darker side of the dark web is I think a lot of the markets that exist. Obviously, Silk Road was the first one. Then there was Silk Road 2. Then there was Alpha Bay. But there's markets that still exist. There's probably about a dozen or so, I'd say, quote unquote, large markets that still exist. Versus being one of them. And you can see there's a potpourri of things that are for sale, whether it be drugs or social security numbers. You name it. And some of the drugs are pretty benign, things like Xanax, and other ones can be obviously definitely more intense in terms and probably closer to the scale of illegality in most places. But it just depends. There's a lot of these sites out there, like I said, about a dozen strong ones, large ones, and every time one does seem to go dark, another one usually will pop up to replace it in short order. Now, not all these sites are real. Many of them do have a lot of vendors that are scammers, or the actual people running the site will do what's known as kind of a crypto exit scheme or a Bitcoin exit scam, in which they'll have the people kind of do a lot of orders. There may be a few legitimate vendors on the site, but a lot are not. And then after, because again, these sites are kind of like an escrow account. People go, they put they'll put their order in, and the site will kind of hold the cryptocurrency until the orders deliver. But if you get over the span of maybe 3-4 weeks, a month, all of a sudden orders aren't going through, they're still getting a lot of orders, even though things aren't being delivered, and they have a large sum of cryptocurrency, and then the site will go dark, and they'll take all that cryptocurrency that people dropped on the site expecting to get products. Products never come, and they take the cryptocurrency. And as I mentioned earlier, there's kind of those traditional sites people think of, but there's also some, I'd say, what are even darker sites. Here's a particular site. It's been off and online the last year or so it may finally have gone dark, but they're claiming to sell gold and diamonds. But also, if you also look in the finer print, also rhino horns. Found and harvested in Africa, which is obviously they're an endangered animal. There's very few left. The ivory of the horns is very valuable, but this site is claiming to offer some type of ability to get access to that. And just like the normal internet, again, like the operationalization of the internet, there's a site called Dark Jobs that has been out. It was down for a little bit. I saw it came back, and then it was down again. So this may or not be active at the time I publish this video, but I'm sure there'll be another site that pops up very similar. But Dark Jobs is a site where there's contractors. You can post your resume, your skill sets, and then there's principals. And these are individuals who are looking for jobs that are as simple as couriers, looking to buy cigarettes and booze or certain items and shipping them to different parts of the world. Or it could be something as sophisticated as creating a very specific piece of malware. So everything from low-tech to high-tech jobs are often posted on these dark websites. One of the things I often get a lot of comments or questions on my channel about is kind of what was the overall impact of COVID. COVID is still having a social impact in different parts of the world. Many of us have kind of moved on from it. But in terms of the impact, especially in 2020, cybercrime increased 400%. The FBI in the United States received almost 1 million cyber complaints, which was record-breaking at the time. About $4.2 million billion dollars in losses. And there was a 750% increase in ransomware. I don't know if this is directly, that rise in ransomware is directly tied to COVID. It was starting to rise already in 2017, 2018, 2019. I think this was just a pivot point in which ransomware became kind of the de facto way to really attack large companies. Just because it was a way to not only, you've infiltrated. So think about what used to happen before ransomware. A hacker, a cyber criminal would infiltrate a company, they'd steal the data, and they would, sell that data. And that would kind of be the end of it. Now with ransomware, they've stolen the data, they've locked the system, they've placed the ransom. The ransom, whether or not it gets paid or not, you still have the data as a secondary backup to potentially sell on the dark web. So it provided a kind of a secondary, a kind of a dual means of income for a cyber attack. And then also some of the ones who are definitely more sophisticated, they may unlock. If someone does pay, they may unlock the system, but they also could leave something behind that gets triggered in 6 months or a year. That's also possible, providing potentially a recurring source of revenue in the future. So what is the overall cost to the world of cybercrime due to this ocean of data that is available on the dark web with all these tools and assets? Well, the projection is that by 2025, so in the next 2 to 3 years, the overall cost to the world of cybercrime, so this includes everything from malware to data breaches to ransomware, you name it, to your laptop getting hacked and people stealing maybe your bank account, is going to be roughly around $10 trillion. I've seen numbers around 8 trillion, I've seen 10, I've seen 9, I've seen 11, but let's just say as a nice round number, about $10 trillion. Putting that into perspective, the entire world economy is expected to be in terms of the GDP of every country put together by 2025 is expected to be around $100 trillion. So $10 trillion in cybercrime cost, $100 trillion in terms of the overall productivity of the world in terms of products and services. So about 10% of the world economy could be siphoned away due to cybercrime in the next 3 years, which is just astounding. And wrapping up kind of Dark Web 101, one thing I wanted to highlight is I talked about kind of operationalizing the dark web. Well, it happens with tools like this. So here's a tool, Sentry, and what it allows cyber criminals to do, or anarchists, or nation states to do, and they probably have a little more sophisticated ones than this one, but it allows you to basically feed it a file that has different website names. And you also can feed it a list of emails and passwords. And there's a lot of other things you can do in terms of how it retries and maximum length of passwords and different combinations. But basically, it allows you to take, let's say 1 billion records of emails and passwords and bang away at different websites, bang away at Bank of America or Wells Fargo or Netflix until you get a few successes. And if you have 1 billion emails and password combinations, all it takes is a few hundred, just far less than 1% of those emails and passwords to be accurate and up to date. And you get access potentially hundreds or maybe 1,000 accounts. Get access to those services, potentially steal the funding from different sites, get access to credit card information, names, addresses, and potentially harvest even more information to sell, or to just use whatever access you get to with whatever financial assets that are available and execute against them. So that's how it has become operationalized. This is just one example of how you don't need a lot of computer skills. You just need kind of a file with some of the basic, here's some websites, here's some email and passwords, feed it, and start banging away and see if you can break through and in a sense, quote unquote, hack a specific website. So why can't the dark web be shut down? I get this question all the time on my YouTube channel. And so I'll just caveat it that, the dark web cannot be shut down, and I'll explain the 5 reasons in a bit. But definitely the dark web can be stopped. And what I mean by that is there's plenty of evidence over the last years, especially as there's been more investments from both domestic and kind of international police like Interpol, where things like Silk Road have been shut down. Various Alpha Bay has been shut down. Various cyber criminals around the world have been found, despite all the security and anonymity that a lot of these tools and services provide. There are, especially unless you're super diligent all the time, there are little kind of crumbs that are left behind. And with enough time and effort, law enforcement can often hunt down the most nefarious offenders. So parts of the dark web can be stopped with a lot of time and a lot of money. But why can't the overall dark web in totality be shut down? Reason number 1 is government limitations. Governments, only have certain geographic boundaries that they're allowed to enforce their authority against. So, perfect example is somebody attacks let's say a meat plant in the United States, but the attack came from servers in Kazakhstan. Well, the FBI and it doesn't have, and the U.S. government doesn't have a lot of influence or authority in that part of the world. Assuming that's where the servers came from for the attack, then now that doesn't mean the individual lives there. That just means the servers that were used to execute the attack may be traced back to a country like Kazakhstan, right? And so the limitations, definitely, of governments and authorities is one of the reasons. Number two, it's very expensive. As I mentioned, as things have gotten operationalized, people who are less sophisticated are able to execute cyber attacks, but the underlying technology is still really complicated. Like if you want to try to unwind a cyber attack and try to trace where it came from and how and where, that does require computer engineering, computer science backgrounds, people who have IT experience, and that experience is in general short supply, especially the people who have really good experience and who are at the top of their game. Number three, hidden services and software. Well, by design, the entire quote-unquote dark web was built to hide activity, allow people to be anonymous, allow for basically any and all traffic to be encrypted. So by design, it's meant to mask someone's identity and their location. Number four, payments are hard or impossible to track. So on the dark web, obviously, unless you're an amateur, you're using cryptocurrency. And now something like Bitcoin is pseudo-anonymous. It is trackable and traceable. It was hard a few years ago, but there's been a lot of investment, especially the U.S. government has been doing a lot of investing to try to figure out how can we track kind of the cookie crumbs of Bitcoin transactions to track them back to an individual. There's also really easier ways with exchanges that exist, whether it be Coinbase or the infamous FTX. Those are real companies. People often keep their Bitcoins and their private keys on those exchanges, and being able to have governments with a lot of power and influence at the barrel of a gun, or the threat of jail time for the founders of these exchanges, they're able to figure out, who's logged into your system, how have they paid, where do they live, right? Now there are other cryptos, like Monero is one of them, that looks to be pretty impossible to track. And number five, and I think this is the important one, it's something that is often overlooked, is the dark web is not all bad. As I mentioned at the start, at the end of the day, one of the three things I wanted you to take away was that the dark web is merely a means to anonymously and securely transfer information. So think about political dissidents in parts of the world where you can't speak up, you don't have free speech, there's a lot of political turmoil, maybe there's genocide. The dark web gives a means for people to try to protect themselves, but tell the world potentially what's going on. Every major news site around the world has a site on the dark web where people can post information within whatever area they're at. So that's just one clear example of how the mechanism and the underlying instruments of the dark web serve a net good for the world, especially for those who are the most desperate. Now let's look at some dark web trends for kind of 2022 and probably into 2023. So the top 5 kind of continued trends that I saw for this year was around ransomware, social media, combo list, medical records, and malware dumps. So from ransomware, it is one of the kind of the premier threat vectors that is out there. It started to really ramp up about 5 years ago as things became a little more operationalized and a template was set. But you're seeing that continued growth of ransomware. 2, social media. So not only attacks through social media, but also cyber criminals leveraging social media to sell data, sell services. Combo list. So combo list for those is kind of a term that's often used, which just means a password and email combination. So combo lists used to be able to find combo list of 10,000, 100,000, maybe 1 million records. Now there's combo lists being sold by various threat actors or given away for free that are in the hundreds of millions, if not billions of records. So that much That much credential information increases the likelihood that, again, when you use some of the tools I showed earlier, that you're going to get some positive hits and be able to potentially steal individuals' identities or infiltrate companies. Number 4, medical records. Now, cyber criminals and hackers, they're not looking for your MRIs or your CT scans. That data really has no value. The thing is, when you think about what's on a medical record, extremely rich data set, insurance information, bank account information, potentially credit card information, social security number, a lot of information not only about you, but potentially your family. So those are very rich data sets. And also, conversely, generally, hospitals and outpatient facilities have very weak IT security. They're there. The experts who get paid there are the doctors, right? And they're paid to make people well and be experts in medicine. Generally, they're not experts in IT or have the budget to really hire the best IT professionals to secure their systems. So they're soft targets. Number 3, malware dumps. So these are basically when someone's laptop or phone is infected with malware. It can often track and absorb and exfiltrate a ton of information over weeks and months until the end user figures it out and it gets rid of the virus or whatever else is on their system. But kind of those data dumps of someone's entire activity for the past month, those things are continue to be available on the dark web in sizable numbers. Top 5 emerging and accelerating trends, I think, for 2022 and definitely into 2023, high value data sets. So again, we talked about the billions of records and maybe combo data, but definitely more and more complete data sets. So things like, SSN with a driver's license, with a phone number, with an address, completely tied together rather than just one-offs. Scans and images. It's shocking how many scans and images that are out there, not only just maybe of a driver's license or a passport, but things that people have taken up, pictures that people have taken on their phone of personal information or medical record information. Maybe they've taken it for a specific event or to maybe email to a doctor. It's on their Google Drive or what have you. Or an iCloud, and their credentials have been hacked, and all those pictures and images have been pulled down. And there can be a lot of very valuable information in those images. The other one is kind of digital marketing databases. So in terms of, there's been a lot of spam, in terms of improvements in suppressing spam on a lot of email services, which is great. But there's also a continued explosion of, leads databases and email databases that are out there freely available on the dark web. Just again, it's about just trying to hit more and more people. So rather than having a spam system put out, 10 million emails, they're going to try to put out 1 billion emails. And they can do that with some of these digital marketing databases that are for sale. Other thing is hacking tutorials. As I mentioned, kind of the operationalization of the dark web, hacking tutorials have gotten so much better, so much more sophisticated, so much higher quality and informative. Just like all online learning, the last, I would say, let's say 10 years has gotten so much better. That's also true for the dark web. And the last piece is South American data. South America has started to really emerge, specifically Brazil, as definitely an up-and-coming area of the world that has some pretty sophisticated technologists, some ransomware gangs. So that is definitely that is a region to look out for. I definitely expect probably a major attack centered around, at least supposedly coming from that part of the world, definitely within the next year or two. Now, the future. So what does the future look like? Well, I don't think we can talk about the future without talking about the metaverse. Now, the metaverse is not a single place. There are a number of different metaverses that are out there, run by a number of different companies. And some of the metaverses are specifically tailored around things like entertainment. Some of them are tailored around kind of NFT technology, and others are tailored around more practical world problems, what's kind of coined as in the industrial metaverse, which is trying to simulate, real world processes as much as possible, or to mirror real world processes in the metaverse, and in order to try to figure out when will the system go wrong. So there's many different flavors of quote unquote the metaverse. That being said, wherever people are and wherever there is, where the data is or the data that people generate is, cyber criminals will follow. So the metaverse, let's just say holistically, is really, really the Wild West. It kind of reminds me a little bit of kind of mid-90s internet at this point. Still really low def. Some of the technology I think is a little bit underwhelming. But again, when people are trying to just figure out the fundamentals of something as large as the metaverse, things like security and processes and backups and those type of fundamental mature parts of technology often are overlooked. So I think the metaverse will become a rich target for cyber criminals of all types, from script kiddies to nation states to organized crime over the next few years, as different flavors of the metaverse and more people, I think, will start to plug into one or all or some of these different kind of metaverse worlds, for sure. And especially that'll be true once people are able to purchase more and more things on the metaverse. So as promised, I did want to talk about some ID protection tips. So this is a completely free, every one of these is free, but here are kind of what I would consider the ID theft protection checklist. Number one, make a list of all your online accounts and categorize to help prioritize accounts to secure first. So again, not all accounts are equal. Obviously, your financial accounts are, I think, the most at risk and the most valuable. Things like your social accounts and your reputation, I think, are second. And then there's things like entertainment. So think about Bank of America is number one, Facebook number two, and then Netflix number three. So try to categorize all your entire online footprint if possible. Make an offline list. Yes, paper. I know in 2022, if it's not digital, it doesn't seem like it's the right way to do things. But when it comes to tracking your accounts and passwords, storing them on your iCloud or your iPhone or somewhere else on your laptop, chances are, again, there's a risk that gets breached, and then your entire kind of credentials could potentially be stolen. So store that on paper, preferably. Number three, you can get a free credit report from all three credit bureaus. So there's Experian, Equifax, and TransUnion. I would do that at least once a year, not only to get a baseline of your credit history, but also see if there are any accounts that maybe you're no longer using that you can close to shrink your digital footprint. But also to see if there's any accounts or names that are maybe shown up on your credit report that are erroneous, or maybe you are the victim of identity theft and you don't even know it. Number four, leverage free dark web scans. Just type in Google free dark web scan. There are a few services out there where you can do either emails and or a social security number and phone numbers, and it'll give you a free scan to see if any of these critical pieces of information are on the dark web. And then you can maybe take the appropriate action. You can decide, is it an email? Do you want to change your password? SSN is definitely very serious. If that is the case, you'd want to actually freeze your three credit reports. So you would have to go and do that with all three credit bureaus. Phone numbers, you can decide. Phone numbers aren't as much a risk, but just be aware if your phone number is on the dark web, you may be getting more a smishing type of attacks more than normal. So just be aware. If you get an illicit text message that talks about a delivery or clicking on a link, don't do it. Again, it's good to just have the knowledge. Number five, freeze. If you do have kids, freeze your kids' credit file. There's something known as synthetic IDs. I don't want to get into it. Where someone's identity could be compiled of different elements, and often the SSN is a child's identity. And what can often happen is, a child's identity could be, SSN specifically, could be stolen at age 2 or age 3, and they don't realize it until they're 17, 18. They go to try to buy that first car, open up a loan and realize that their credit score is garbage and their identity was potentially stolen, 15 years earlier. Number 6, lock your credit file with at least one bureau with an online service. 3 is ideal. And again, freezing your credit file is free. It's a little more tedious, but you can go to each of the 3 credit bureaus. You can lock it. There are services that are available through all the 3 credit bureaus through their mobile app that allow you to kind of unlock and lock. And those vary. Sometimes they're free depending on what package you buy. Sometimes they're not. But in terms of freezing your credit file, you can submit a request through each credit bureau to lock it. It's just when you go to buy that next home or a car or a student loan, you definitely need to unfreeze it. So it takes a little bit more time, but honestly, you should always generally be in a state where all your credit is frozen. It's one of the great ways to really protect your identity. If your information is stolen through no fault of your own, which is usually the case, your dentist gets breached, a doctor gets breached, maybe Facebook gets breached and you're using the same password or credential combinations, and all of a sudden, you find someone buying stuff in your name or opening up a loan in your name. That won't happen if your credit is frozen. Make sure your Wi-Fi home network requires password to access. Most of them do default to something nowadays that's a little bit stronger, but make sure your local Wi-Fi network in your home does have some type of password to access it. Have a fake email. Number 8, have a fake email and a random password for non-essential accounts. So all those kind of junk accounts where you don't really use daily or weekly or monthly, they're kind of one-time things. Payments, maybe a piece of furniture, a specific, maybe you're traveling to Europe, you're on Ryanair, you don't normally use Ryanair. Use a different email. Have an email that's more for all this kind of one-off stuff or junk stuff, or for things maybe you online purchases from smaller vendors that necessarily you don't trust as much, or potentially have a higher likelihood of getting breached because they're smaller companies and they don't have robust IT departments. Number 9, there is a Google Password Checkup extension that's been built into newer versions of Chrome, and it will pop up and tell you, hey, when it is saving your password, if you do save your password in the browser, it will tell you like, hey, this password and email combination looks like it's showing up in a number of different sites or on other different data breaches. So just be aware of those notifications, or download the newest version of Chrome, or look if you don't use Chrome, use Mozilla or Safari. See if there's a password checkup extension. It's a good way because, again, everyone's digital footprint seems to get bigger and bigger. Try to shrink it when you can, but when you do expand it, try to make sure you're using a password email combination that's not already breached. And number 10, 2FA, two-factor authentication on all important accounts. So you can do this with a password and text pin sometimes, or sometimes an authenticator app on your phone. So obviously any bank account, any financial account, credit card accounts, try to enable two-factor if it's available. So this way, instead of just an email password to log in, you need a PIN from a text or some type of random code from an authenticator app that's tied to the system. So those are the 10 free ID theft prevention checklists. Follow these 10. It will definitely help you to reduce your likelihood of being a victim of identity theft. Now, which password is more secure? Well, the answer to that question is actually password number 2. I too saw a red bear. Most people would say it's number 1 because it seems random and possible to guess. The reality is hackers aren't guessing passwords anymore. They're using sophisticated computer algorithms that can run through millions and millions of password combinations. However, those algorithms slow down and become harder to crack. The number 1 reason is length. So not randomness of the password, but the length of the password is the biggest variable. And so this one, I too saw a red bear. It was a 12, 13 characters or so. So that's the first factor. Longer is better. And then some variability is number 2. So you can see it has the number 2 in there. It also has some capital in there. And I think the third piece is that if you want to make it also easy to remember, just pick something. So again, I too saw a red bear is easy to remember. However, red bears don't exist. So, or you could say a pink bear, right? Those are not normal things. Now, if you said, I too saw a brown bear or a black bear, those exist. Those are real. So that is something where a random computer algorithm probably would try a brown bear, black bear, polar bear combination, but a red bear doesn't exist. So when you're trying to do passwords that are easy to remember and long, stay away from obviously things related to pop culture. Don't have anything related to Star Wars or Marvel or anything like that in there. Try to pick something that doesn't exist in the world. So you can see, as I alluded to earlier, strong passwords equal long passwords. So then that previous example, it had numbers, uppercase, lowercase, symbols, but it was 8 characters long, which takes about 8 hours to crack with modern computer systems. If you just have upper and lowercase letters, not even numbers, you're looking at roughly 300 years for something that's 12 characters long. So you can see a huge difference. Length makes a huge difference. Add a little randomness, and then add something that is maybe practical to remember that relates to you, that's not in the real world, and you'll have a secure password that's easy to remember. So that's it. That is the state of the dark web as we close out 2022. Hopefully this video was informative and influential. If you have any questions or comments, definitely please add them to the comments section below. Check out the Dark Web Deacon merch store. We have high-quality t-shirts, accessories, and signature hoodies, of course, and become a true dark web enthusiast in VIP. New videos are published every Monday and Thursday.